Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Oh, hang on. You're still there. Good, I'm glad. Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith. Representative Walters. Nope, hadn't come in yet. And Chairman's here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have on my right side, Jason Mead, Acting Director of the Water Development Office. And on my left, the Acting State Engineer, Brandon Gephardt. I appreciate them being here. They're just for support if you have any questions concerning the bill. So, members of the appropriation, we have before you House Bill 6. I'd like you to walk you through that and fairly quickly, but so you understand what we have before you. So as the ARPA funds were being distributed and provided to us as a state, we believe that a strong use of those funds is to be used by our communities to install wastewater and water systems, not only the economic benefit for our local contractors, but also the benefit of our citizens. And so the Select Water Committee prepared House Bill 6 for your consideration. So I'm going to direct your attention to page 2, line 15. Everything previous to that was just formalities and definitions. The Wyoming Statewide American Rescue Plan Act Water Infrastructure Program is hereby created. So we met with the governor's task force and asked them how should we put a program together. And they recommended that we use the 3 agencies that currently work with these types of projects. And that is DEQ, WWDC, and Office of State Lands. And as a committee, we chose the Water Development Commission to be the lead, mostly because we work so closely with them, we felt like we could monitor the activities. And so this is creating a program whereby the Water Development Commission would take the lead, but the other 2 agencies would support them and provide staff to manage the applications. So on page 3, for the
Simpson, so you're saying this is basically going to be shadowing or replicating exactly how the Select Water Committee does water projects now. So we're using existing, we know how to do it.
it's going to be slightly different, Mr. Chairman, and in that the Water Development Commission usually receives the applications and goes through the study process. This is going to be a little bit unique, much like the Office of State Lands. They're just going to receive an application. So they're going to develop the protocol and the program with the assistance of the other 2 agencies, and they're going to call for applications. And so this is probably going to happen about August or September, and they'll make it known to all the municipalities and water and sewer districts. They'll be the ones that apply, and there'll just be one application which they will prepare, and those people will fill it out and submit it. I expect it to be a one and done deal. I think the 95 million will go quickly, and there will be a waiting list for the money. I could be surprised, but I think that's going to be the case. And so those applications will come in. These 3 agencies will sort through them just like they do traditionally. This would certainly be very similar processes, and they would rank them. And so they're going to determine which projects are the most eligible. So it'll be a function of the community's needs, what their water or sewer rates are at the time, unique situations about each project that might be before them. And they'll consider all of that, and they'll have their own ranking system, much like they do now. And so they're going to rank them all out. And then as we progress through, back on page 4 and 5, it talks about they'll actually rank the systems, the projects, and then they'll bring it back to the Wyoming Water Development Commission. That's a 10-man and woman body that's appointed by the governor, and they'll review them. Now, there was quite a bit of debate about a commission reviewing them finally, and we do have a clause in here that says that the Select Water Committee will be the ultimate reviewer. But we wanted the Water Development Commission to be the ones that organized it, approved it, and processed it. And frankly, the reason is very simple. Sometimes elected officials have a tendency of getting involved a little bit too deep and trying to push their pet projects in their areas. And with this being an election year, it made sense to us that the staff is just going to treat every project straight up. They don't have any aspirations or opinions. And so we think the projects will come out, let the best projects win, and away we go. But we do have in there, I'll find it for you in a minute, that the Select Water Committee will have one last look at it. As you understand appropriations, it was inappropriate for us to set up this program, appropriate the money, and then have legislators come back in back door and actually choose the projects. So legal counsel steered us away from that. So on page 4, lines 12 through 15 is important. So we gave a lot of thought to what, should we go 100% grant? Should we go 50% grant? And the reason we chose 85 is because these projects can go elsewhere and get a 50% grant. And we didn't want to do all the way to 100% grant because we felt like they needed some skin in the game. So we chose 85 as being kind of the best place in between. So 85 is going to be the best funding package, which means we're going to get a lot of those projects that have just been hanging on that the citizens just can't afford to do. But all of a sudden now, with a 15% match, they can afford to do it. And so we think there's going to be a lot of pent up projects, especially in the wastewater side, that we think will come forward and make an application here. So an 85% grant, and then on line 15, we kind of needed to put a ceiling on it because otherwise a large municipality that's got a $20 million project could come in and try to just take too much of the funds. And so we put a $7.5 million cap on it so that any one project couldn't take so much. I anticipate that there'll be 20 to 30, upwards of 35 projects that'll get funded. There's a lot of $1 and $2 million wastewater projects that are waiting for this kind of a project to come along. This kind of funding. So with that, I think we can work through the rest of it. Again, it talks about prioritizing the 3 agencies working together and how they're going to work that out. The entity that's applying for the grant has to be a legitimate legal entity. And they have to agree, of course, to pay back any loan that would be involved and participate and make sure that the project's followed through. So I'm on page 7. The grants are to be awarded prior to October 1st, 2024, and the project termination dates must be before 2026 at the end of the year. So we feel like we have plenty of time to work this out and to proceed. So on page 7, line 21, we considered a lot of numbers, and sometimes we have a tendency of just throwing big numbers, knowing that we're going to get cut in half and slashed. And this selection of this number was based on projects that are in the queue and ready to go. Let me share a couple numbers with you. So Director Gephardt issued a memorandum August of this last year. It indicated that, just for information, we have $111 million of irrigation projects, which aren't eligible, but irrigation projects that are in the queue, ready. They've already done their level 1 and levels 2 studies. $111 million. Of the drinking water stuff, we had $64 million that are already completed the level 1 and level 2. Now, as you recall, the Water Development Commission only funds projects that are developing a source like a spring or a well, and then they do supply lines and then storage tanks. That's all. So all of the projects that are fire hydrants and pipelines in streets and service connections, they aren't funded by this agency at all. And so there's at least that many more projects that are distribution piping. And then we throw in the wastewater projects, which I personally estimate around $100 million of wastewater projects that are waiting to happen. So we rapidly reach into that $300 million potential projects that could come. So I would suggest to you that the 95 is what we need to be successful, and would appreciate your consideration of that. Mr. Chairman, I believe that works us all the way through the end of the bill.
Simpson, could we go back to section 2? We kind of jumped over that a little bit, but I had a question on the development of the rules. Just had a question. I up above, we're going to, the act shall be awarded prior to 2024. When have you got a time frame that those rules need to be developed is my first question. And then you've got water development promulgating the rules, in state lands and environment quality may promulgate rules. Does that become cumbersome? If Water Development Office is going to promulgate the rules and they need assistance from state lands on how those rules should look, or DEQ, how those rules should look, shouldn't that just be, they'd go, I'm just not understanding why we got a shall for one and then these other guys may, and just don't want that to be confusing in the process.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address the last question, and I'll give time to Director Mead to be able to address how his agency visualizes that. But we're envisioning that these rules would come together really quickly. We've got 3 very experienced agencies, and so the promulgating the rules is really just a matter of a few days to sit down and hammer out the application form and how they're going to prioritize the projects. Director Mead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. As far as rules and setting up criteria and prioritization and all that, we typically go through that with the Select Water Committee and the Water Development Commission. So the plan would be, if this bill were to pass, we would jump right into that, probably tee it up at our March meeting, continue it at our May meeting, finalize it perhaps at our August meeting, and get those things in place as soon as we could.
Whose August meeting and whose May meeting?
Yeah, sorry. That would be the Water Development Commission and Select Water Committee meetings. They typically meet jointly in May and August.
And so follow up, Mr. Chairman, I thought that legislators were backing out of this once it was approved.
Go ahead. You want me to-
And Mr. Chairman, I'm really just addressing how the criteria would get set up in our program to implement the program and the prioritization.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Not
So
specific
do you need the
projects.
legislature to tell you how to do that?
What we do is we put together recommendations for consideration by our commission, and then the Select Water Committee reviews those as well.
Am I making sense here?
You are, and I think what you're asking is how much will the Select Water Committee be involved in the rule promulgation?
Well, exactly. And that's based on the conversation you had, or the comments you made, that we get to a point here and we're not going to have the legislature come back in the back door and be doing anything. And I see that as in the rulemaking and as an opportunity to do that. And so I'm curious why the agencies just couldn't draft the rules and get on with the project.
Very good. Let me tell you how this looks, what the bill says. The bill says that the agencies will promulgate the rules. They'll present it to the Water Development Commission as a courtesy so they're able to stay involved. But the Select Water Committee doesn't come involved. We will not be voting or participating until the very final when the projects are selected.
Thank you.
Director Gephardt, State Engineer Gephardt, Mr. Chairman, may he throw a comment in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the procedure, that this is a common procedure that we do. It's slightly different than what we do with the Water Development Program. But the procedure that we envision with this bill would very closely mimic the procedure that we use for the SRF program involving state lands, DEQ, and water development. So the development of this program would be very similar to what we do currently with that program.
Okay, and then Representative Simpson, I wouldn't ask so many questions. My wife's watching today, sorry.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, thank you. I have a question on page 1, line 15. And this defines American Rescue Plan Act funds as Section 604 funds. And that surprised me because I was expecting it to be, say, 602. It's my understanding that Section 604 is the $109 million capital projects fund, of which we've allocated $10 million for the facility, multipurpose facility in Jackson already, which would leave another $100 million. So there is 95 there, but it's also my understanding that some broadband folks were hoping to get a chunk of that money as well. Is there a reason, whereas water and wastewater projects, of course, are eligible for funding under Section 602. So I just wanted to ask the question about why the choice 604 over 602.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that is a really good catch. Representative Stiff, I like sitting next to you for that reason. After we processed this bill and got it up and running just a couple of days ago, LSO staff had additional attorneys look at this, and they've pointed that as a mistake out. And so they've submitted an amendment to Mr. Chairman to submit, to take care of that line item and a couple other little tweaky things. And so we have an amendment to change that to 602.
So just to follow up on that, some of the projects that are submitted would qualify under the 109. And so I'm curious, I mean, but that's also an application process. So with the 109, if you're submitting water projects, you have to submit that to the feds to get a write-off on, an approval of them. So it will slow down the process. But that doesn't mean that all of the 109 or 99% of it should go to broadband if you have particular projects where it qualifies for direct. And so that's my question is, have you, because you said a lot of these are in the queue. So my guess is we probably have the ability to determine which ones will or would not qualify for the 109. And then we could be selective if we wanted to, or at least have that option available.
We're going to have to, Mr. Chairman, direct that question to Mr. Richards. Mr. Richards told us to change this to 102. That's all I know.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm trying to get a sense of what $95 million represents. And I guess I would start because I thought I heard you say a lot of the applications would be in the $1 million to $2 million range. And so my question really is, how fast can you process applications to use up 95 million? I mean, is this something that will take a few months or a year, or do you understand where I'm getting at?
It's like flipping pancakes.
I'll take a stab at that, Mr. Chairman. I believe that once we get the rules developed and the application developed, that it'll be a fairly simple process. And so I think we would be looking at multiple applications at one time. And it would be a handful, but I do think that we can probably process significant number of applications. We can, while we continue the conversation, I might pop out and I see that Director Parfit is here. Maybe he has an idea what we can do with SRF as far as expediency. So I will try to get that question answered before we leave here today.
So follow.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to get a time frame. I mean, you can process multiple applications, but I don't know your business well. Is that 3 months, 6 months, a year? Do you have any idea?
Mr. Chairman, I envision this over maybe even multiple years. The money has to be allocated through the ARPA funds by 2024 and expended by 2026. So that would be part of the analysis. So I would think that over time, over 3 to 5 years or 3 to 4 years, we would have everything allocated and then completed in the next 2 years. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to remember when we finished our work in January, and we put the budget bill together and then we put the ARPA bill together. I'm trying to remember sort of the bottom line that maybe hasn't already been kind of thought about in one way or another. Is there a balance that that we don't have obligated? Does anybody remember what those numbers were?
Was that a question for?
That was a question, yeah.
I didn't hear.
Don't you remember?
You're asking me how
Couple
much
hundred,
dollars?
yeah,
are available?
I'm asking, how much did we really not have sort of thought out for one place
Well,
or
yeah,
another?
that's one of my questions, because right now there's only $120 million basically left in ARPA 602 dollars, which means that you're going to take 90% of it for this particular project. And so that means there'll be nothing left. Maybe 10 or 15 million for next year or the next year for any other ARPA, those particular type of dollars. And so that's,
Mr. Chairman, so we've got 50 already. We've got 50 already allocated.
well, which 50 is that? Is that the
Yeah,
local
so-
government?
So we've got local government. and
Water,
Then
right.
we put in another 50 local, and so then this would take another 40. Because the 50 that we put in there for super water projects, we said would
Offset, basically.
not work if this passed.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So how many of the projects that you envision funding through this process would normally be funded through the current funding format with Water One, Water Two dollars?
I can only estimate, but I would think about 1/3 of the projects. Because maybe 1/4 of the projects are in Water Development Commission's queue that is going to be asking for funds in the next 2 to 3 years, probably 1/4 of them.
So do you envision those projects asking for both Water One, those products, and then supplementing with some of these dollars, or can you tag team them together? Have you envisioned how that might work?
We're really trying to release the demand that's going to be in front of us with the irrigation projects. There's going to be a massive demand in the future. So by pulling some of these out, slipping them into this program, will lessen the pressure there. There will be some of these projects that will be asking for the loan, the 15%. We have water and sewer districts that have nothing, and so they'll be asking 15% probably from WWDC.
And then just walking through this, how do you intend to notice all of those folks that may be qualified to apply for, have a desire for these funds?
Mr. Chairman, I think the intent would be to get the word out through our commission meetings as well as our network of sponsors we've worked with in the past. A lot of these folks have master plans where they've gone through planning studies with us and have projects kind of laid out in priority for their system on how to get those implemented. We've already actually had some sponsors approach us aware of this bill, asking when might those dollars be available and all that stuff.
So what you just told me is you really don't have a plan to notify anyone that may not be in your network.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that the wastewater projects are not in our network because those projects don't meet our criteria now. So I think with those, we would work through state lands and DEQ as the bill suggests to identify those other potential sponsors.
Mr. Chairman, I believe WAM representatives are in the room and they could maybe answer that question of how they would get the word out to their municipalities too.
Well, and what's interesting about this is the way that this is crafted, you don't have to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. And it's not subject to any type of review, which means that whatever you do is what you do. But how do we know that you're going to let everyone that might be qualified have notice of and how to apply and what they can do to do it? I mean, to me, it's a fairly big obligation that we have as a state to do that. So it's just not everybody's favorites, but just figuring out a mechanism and yet we're making you exempt from any type of review from what you do.
That's a good point, Mr. Chairman. I think we would take that as a personal challenge to make sure that the word gets out and when they promulgate the rules, certainly they can approach that.
However, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to recall when we done the CARES Act, we had those projects, we did the same type of.
I presume that's where the language came from to some degree.
It came from our attorneys, so. Mr. Chairman, should we address that amendment? Does the body
Sure.
have a copy of that?
Does everyone have the amendment?
Before we sit down and let
You want
others,
to make a copy? It's a fairly simple amendment. Yeah, just pass it.
I would be glad to walk you through it if you want to wait or just go. Okay. On page 1, line 15, delete 604 and insert 602. Page 3, line 18, after shall, insert periodically. On page 3, line 19, delete the words on a rolling basis. On line 19 of page 3, delete the words on a rolling basis. On page 4, line 2, after Roman numeral 2, delete the balance of that line, as well as line 3, delete all of line 3, and all of line 4. And then on line 5, delete the words applications, comma, the, and insert capital the Wyoming Water Development. And then we will take off with the word office. It's already existing. And one more on page 4, line 7, after the word commission, comma, insert the following words: on a first come, comma, first served basis. That would be the standing committee
Mr.
amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Go
I
ahead.
just had a question. So I understand the first part of the amendment. What's the cumulative effect of all of those changes on page line 4? Is the cumulative effect of that is that the office just reviews them on a first come, first basis, or is there an obligation to prioritize them? I just got lost in all the changes.
You know,
Trying to figure out the purpose of the amendment.
One of our LSO staff attorneys was uncomfortable with those first 3 lines because you notice they slip back in on first come, first served basis, but it was how we structured the sentence. It was a first come, first served basis, and then it says if they receive multiple offices, they're going to evaluate and prioritize. So there was something confusing there for our attorneys.
Mr. Chairman, from my point of view, it makes sense to either prioritize the projects or to do it on a first come, first served basis, but you can't do both. Because if you're doing it on a first come, first served basis, you're not prioritizing it. You're just saying whoever gets to the door first wins, right? So.
Yeah, I have the same question.
So my take on that is the first part that we deleted doesn't even have to be evaluated. It just says, come fill out your application, first come, first served basis. And then we put in there that now it has to be evaluated and prioritized. But then first come, first served does conflict.
Mr. Chairman?
Evaluation is important, so we just can't be the first one there.
Mr. Chairman, it all depends on whether or not we receive 100 applications or 2 or 3. If the total applications are under 95 and they're all legitimate applications, they would be awarded. But if not, so if there's a massive amount of applications, then they certainly would have to be prioritized.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the good representative just touched on the issue. There is no deadline for the application process. So it has to either be on a first come, first served basis, or we have to have a deadline for when the applications must come in, because you can't prioritize an application that is yet to be received against an application that is still outstanding. And we don't want to be receiving applications on December 31st of 2024, because we want to have this money out and available sooner, or we will not get the construction completed by 2026. So whether through rule or through this particular bill, we need to put a deadline in that applications shall be received by said deadline, at which time the prioritization will take place. And then the first come, first serve goes away. But the only reason for the first come, first serve is to be able to start sending money out the door prior to a December 31st, 2024 deadline, because that's when it must be allocated by. And so while I don't have a strong way of wording that right now, I just point that out, not as a question, but rather as an observation to the functionality of this particular section.
Go ahead. Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I remember some of the conversations as this was being developed. But I think what was stricken plays to if one entity brings multiple project applications, that's where the priority, if I remember correctly, that was the discussion of the priority, that the priorities would be based on that one entity's applications. So that may change what I believe Select Water discussed.
But that's not what this says, if that was the case. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, Representative Walters has a really good point. It's not intuitively there, but in all of our discussions with the staff, we're going to set a deadline. It's not just randomly let them roll in, because that would not be anyone's best interest. So there will be a deadline in the fall, and we'll receive all the applications, and they'll go through, rank them, prioritize them, ready to go. And I think that's inherent in that sentence in 5. The Wyoming Water Development Office shall evaluate and prioritize eligible projects for recommendation to the commission.
So that brings up a whole nother issue. because if you go back to eligible projects on page 2, all it means is the types of projects authorized to receive funding pursuant to the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan really doesn't authorize any types of dollars, particularly under 602. That would be a 604 program that theoretically would have to fall into it, or the 109,000. Because this is basically general fund dollars. So there is no authorization of these dollars, as I understand it.
So the way I recall that, Mr. Chairman, the authorization for these project is they had to meet the same requirements as the state revolving clean water or drinking water funding. And that's the qualification I think that this was referring to. Is that-
Mr. Chairman, I believe that that was the intent. Yes.
Yeah,
I think that reference back to the act.
but the act, if $602 is the general fund dollars. Yeah, exactly. But it's already been converted, but once it's converted, there is no requirement on how we use it. So,
This is already.
well, if it's all, yeah, that's
604 is. 602 is the direct, we take part of 602 and convert it and serve the rest of it.
but it's conserved funds that we're working from. It's not.
So this is correct.
So where do you divide the line between the direct and the conserved funds? I don't see dividing in the language of the bill. That just doesn't make sense. Then why do we change it to section 602? Was that-
602 is the.
This is only ARPA direct dollars.
This could be included in.
So I'm not that sure that that 604 language is accurate.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
following up on our previous conversation, so Representative Simpson, you brought us this amendment. Would it be appropriate then to leave out that on the first come, first served basis language that we just discussed? The rest of the amendment, I think, and really that where we fix up that whole paragraph makes
Yeah,
sense, but when we go back in and add the,
Maybe another way to ask that question is, when we take that out, how is it going to, do you think it's going to impact?
If we-
Because it doesn't make sense that you're going to have a first come, first served basis.
if the paragraph just reads Wyoming Water Development Office shall evaluate and prioritize eligible projects, et cetera, and go on and never put in anything about first come, first serve.
So, Mr. Chairman, so we leave off on
Page 4, line 7.
page 4, line 7. We just delete that from the standing committee amendment. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I agree that that clarifies it. It really shouldn't be on a first come, first served. That indicates that when an application comes in the door, we immediately fund it. And so I agree with you.
So then,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, follow up, is it appropriate for us to just put a deadline in here that applications will be received no later than September 15th or pick a date? And I know we had a discussion that the commission meets in May and meets again in September, but I don't know why we have to follow their timeline. These are expedited dollars. That's when they meet on standard budget dollars. We want to see this go out a little bit quicker. And so if we put in a date that applications will be received by, say, September 1, rules have to be done a lot sooner. And how do we get a little bit faster on this process instead of just letting the agency move along at their standard pace?
Mr. Chairman, to respond to that, I'm okay if we suggest that there will be a deadline date for applications. I'd really hesitate putting a specific date in. They've given us their assurance they're going to do all their best to get it. But if we give them a date that just, for whatever reason, it chokes down on them, they're in a really bad place. So,
Mr. Chairman, Mr.
So
Chairman,
I would concur with that, but we can say that the office shall establish a deadline after giving sufficient notice. And so we don't have to put an exact date.
Yeah, I like that, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I was concurring with your thoughts.
Further questions?
So we'll step aside, Mr. Chairman, to see if there's anyone else that wants to.
Sure. Any
comment.
public comment? Well, yeah, any public comment on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, if I had one final question that may have for the
Well,
director.
we can
perhaps.
keep asking questions after
Okay.
we move the bill.
Okay.
I think we're going to tinker with this a little bit, and so we'll probably have it work on our amendments and have one more look at it tomorrow. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I
And
wonder
members
what you have to say of what's your interest?
about water. Well, Mr. Chairman, I moved from Rock Springs to Green River, so I did want to just briefly draw your attention to an email that you received. It's a letter from Mayor Rust from the city of Green River. And I'll just highlight the letter briefly so that when you review it, you'll have a good understanding. So the city of Green River, if you're not aware, is in the process of replacing their wastewater treatment plant. And so I'll just highlight some of this here. The city, while moving through the process of constructing a new wastewater treatment plant, has run into some difficulties. The city of Green River currently operates the largest wastewater lagoon system in the Colorado River Basin, with approximately 40 million water users downstream. The last modifications were in 1989. So the city initiated the planning process for the construction of a new plant in 2013 and completed the master plan in 2015. As they were developing the plan, the funding model included a 25% of the expenses coming out for loan forgiveness and grant funding. Unfortunately, a rule change made the city ineligible for loan forgiveness through the SRF. And without this or other sources of grant funding, they had to raise their loan request by $7.5 million so they could go out to bid. Since 2017, they've doubled the typical sewer rate on the payers and expect to top out at about 3 times the historic rate in order to repay the $2.4 million design loan and the $27.6 million construction loan. Almost done here. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed progress with permits, and permits weren't issued until 2021. So the bids that were received, they came in about 50% higher than the pre-pandemic estimates. And the city has rejected all those bids and moved forward, but is still seeking about $15 million to move forward. Lastly, the impacts on COVID-19 and the pandemic are directly responsible for the significant increase in the cost of the project. The city, we talk about shovel ready and, prioritization and things like that. The city's ready to do this. As I mentioned, plans have been in place for now well over 7 years. So I just want you to be aware that, in your discussions, I want to express support for this bill. I appreciate you guys moving forward and trying to get it right and making sure that the funding is properly allocated and accounted for. But I just want to express support for the bill and moving it forward. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Martin. Come on up, Dan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dan Larson. I'm here, I'm on the Select Water Committee, and we discussed this quite a bit. I just hope for your support on the bill. I do think the Wyoming Water Development Office has very good connections, obviously, with the drinking water. We have a lot of rural projects that are out there that I think are ready and probably be really close to, they probably already applied on quite a few of them. The wastewater, and we don't get into that often, but with the other agencies, I'm sure they have ideas too, but I hope you'll support this.
So, Dan, with the process that you guys went through to put this bill together, as you look at that and then as you compare, we took that 50 million of ARPA and put it in the ARPA bill, and the applications would be reviewed by SLIB and approved by SLIB for the same type of things. Give me your opinion comparing the two on
Well, that's,
this is slow and over the middle.
it is, yeah. I think, I guess, are you asking which might go quicker? I really think Wyoming Water Development will. I think they have the manpower there to perform this. Does that answer your question?
Just was curious of your opinion.
All right.
Mr.
Question,
Chairman.
go ahead. Representative
Just,
Smith.
just as a follow-up, for Representative Larson. Same question I'll have for the director. Chairman Nicholas alluded to it earlier, page 5, lines 13 through 21. Basically gives the agency carte blanche to do whatever they feel like. And just want to get your thoughts on that because it seems odd to me that there'd be no review process. And imagine a situation where, for whatever reason, the office approves a project to build a golf course, championship golf course. And because it's water, they call it a water project, right? In other words, something completely unauthorized, right? This provision would appear to say that there's no appeal of that. No one can ever challenge it. And if the office wants to build a championship golf course with this money, they could, right? Because there's no administrative review, there's no judicial review, you're just stuck. And so that's how I read it. Is that a good idea in your view?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I believe that with the Water Development Commission, looking at what is proposed with the 3 agencies and then the select water going over the projects, I don't see how that could happen. I mean, we're all for water projects, drinking water, obviously irrigation water, but that isn't part of this. So I hope that answers the question.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd follow up on the good representative's question he just asked. This also says if a project if a project is denied in the local entity, the local city, the representative just spoke of the wastewater treatment plant. If that project is denied, that entity would have no ability to go back and say, we think we were denied for wrongdoing, that we should have been eligible and we were denied the ability to get that money. And this section of the bill takes the ability for that municipality to go back and say, we were denied and we think that was wrong. We're not talking about building championship golf courses. We're talking about building a wastewater lagoon in the previous example. And if they're denied with this section, there is no ability for them to challenge that denial.
I'm not sure how to answer that. I would hope that that entity could go to the meeting and where we're discussing these projects and have their voice heard. I think they have, 3 chances to get their, press their point that they think theirs is more prior, as a higher priority.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Please,
add
go
a
ahead.
comment to that? I think we need to remember that in order to be ARPA direct eligible, a project must conform with the SRF program in the Safe Drinking Water program. So that'll be part of the criteria and policies that they'll develop with these 3 agencies. It'll be part of the scrutinizing effect as it goes through the application process.
So we kind of have this discussion with our contractor bill that we talked about in. So I guess my question to our select water guys is, do you think it is a reasonable request to say that if they're denied, that notice or an explanation needs to be provided to the applicant on why they were denied?
Mr. Chairman, we certainly could do that because there may be an application that would be denied, certainly. And we could write that in. They would need an explanation of why.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could that not be put in the rulemaking process? I would hope that, hearing that comments, that we would do that.
Okay,
Thanks,
further
Dan.
questions for Dan? Further comments? Go ahead.
Thank you,
Hello,
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nyman.
What's that?
Hello.
Hello, guys, gentlemen, how are you? Appreciate the opportunity to be able to give testimony or testify or just seek out your support for this legislation. I'm probably one of the, if not the newest member on the Select Water Committee, and I would say, other than the House Appropriations Committee and their diligence to be able to look through legislation or proposed legislation and try to find any issues or things like that and to correct any probable problems. In my short tenure and my being able to work with the folks and be a part of the conversation with Select Water, our water district and Director Gephardt are, if not as critical on overseeing projects. I've never really seen that level of depth that they go to make sure that projects are exactly what they say they are and that they're not going to create any kind of problems, or they look deeper. I mean, even in the wells and everything like that they talk about, they look at the impacts potentially down the road from expansion, rural, everything, urban expansion. So I just would encourage you to really strongly look at this and give these folks the opportunity to be able to navigate through this and to allocate some of this water projects dollars potentially out to the community in the state of Wyoming, because water is critical. Wastewater is unbelievably vital to our communities. I know even in my district in Sundance, Wyoming, there's so much infrastructure growing right now as people are moving into my area. It's hard to even find land to purchase. And even in the cities, one of the biggest issues they're running into now is because the cities were developed with undersized piping and everything like that. And so they're having to go back through these communities and try to upgrade in an effort to try to accommodate all this new influx of population. So this is a very important piece of legislation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have some of these dollars remain in and to help develop more infrastructure in our state, which brings jobs to our state and gives opportunity for communities to provide a safe environment for people to bring their families to. And I would also again say, other than the appropriations, and even on this brief time I've sat in this room and watched you guys go over this, I really appreciate your consciousness of what's going on, and you're asking questions that need to be brought up and get this straightened out. And I also believe that our Water Development Commission would do a very, very diligent job of making sure that these monies were not wasted and they were appropriately allocated to the people that were going to do the most good and the municipalities that are going to have the most impact and positive for our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, Representative Nyman. Any questions? Seeing none. All right. Any further testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I want to lead with a very loud thank you on behalf of our members. We appreciate the opportunity that this legislation will give them to address needs that will benefit future generations. And I think it's important to note that that this is very, very much in the spirit of using this one-time money in a way that will have long-term benefit for our citizens, for our children and grandchildren. We do wholeheartedly support this, and we'd be prepared to wholeheartedly support it in its present form. Having said that, I do have a couple of suggestions that for your consideration. First of all, and nothing I say here, I don't intend anything I say here to muddy the water or to in any way make us look less than grateful for the effort that's been made here. The first thing I would just mention for your consideration is that stormwater is eligible under ARPA funds and might be appropriate to be included in this bill as well, which would be as easy, deferring to the LSO
Mr.
attorneys.
Chairman, isn't stormwater considered sewer? It is.
Is it legal? Okay, great. Boom. So I got that one already. I'm on a roll.
That was muddying.
Yeah. Yeah, no pun was intended there, but that would have been a pretty good one. The other thing that that you guys are all on top of already, when we first read this, we thought with so many different agencies involved and we worried a little bit about the process and we wanted to make sure that that the process would be streamlined enough that things could get done. I feel better about that, just having sat through this and hearing how hearing a little bit about how the agencies intend to cooperate and including some of the minor tweaks you've already discussed making to the bill. I think I'm breathing a little easier on that. But again, as the bill moves forward, I hope that it remains streamlined enough that things don't get hung up in the process too much and we can get to the end goal. Having said that, whatever the process is, our members are going to go through it. I think what's important is that when the rules are made, and I know that won't be this group, but I think what's important is that when the rules are made, that they're clear and our folks know exactly how to go about tackling this. Now, the most important thing that I want you to hear, and if you remember, I would say if you remember anything, remember this, but please forget everything else and remember this. 95 million is going to do a lot of good in getting some of these projects done that that are very important for the future and that I'm not sure how would get done otherwise. I don't want you to be under the impression that that it's too much money or that any of it would go to waste. We just threw out a really quick request to our members, to our 99 cities. Please send us your top priorities, water and wastewater projects, and let us, so we've got an idea of what kind of numbers we're talking about out there. And as a side note, we asked for their top 3. We heard back, and again, it was kind of quick. We heard back from 43 of our communities, so less than half of the cities, and they each gave us 3, but totaling up just the top priority, just a single project priority for each of these 43. That number came up to 141 million, just 141.5 million, just from the top priority, not even their top 3 as we'd asked for, but just the top priority from those 43. So you can see that the demand for this is going to be robust. As a side note, what we heard, those ranged from $20,000, because we asked them to let us know what the size of the project was. That was raised from $20,000 up to $27 million. Many of them fell inside, I would even use the word most, fell inside the $7.5 million that's outlined in the bill. But there again was that disparity. We appreciate that the city that has the $20,000 project feels that it's as important as the $27 million project, and it probably is. Again, these are all people that we're talking about, and I appreciated what Representative Baker said about with the wastewater project in Green River as the example, and not just how that will benefit those in the community, but all those who are downriver from that. How important it is that wastewater treatment be done right for the millions of people that are downstream for that. So with that, I appreciate what you're doing here. I appreciate that you've put a generous amount in there. I would encourage you to keep at least that generous amount in there because as I said, you'll have requests far exceeding that. And on that note, I appreciate the work that the agencies are going to be doing in terms of looking at those applications and trying to do those priorities. I don't think that'll be an easy task. for them. So with that, I would again say we appreciate it. I know that our cities appreciate it, and I know that their residents are going to appreciate the work that can be done. With that, I'd take any questions.
Questions? Okay, appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, other public comment?
Can we request public comment? Beth, could we pick on you a little bit? So I believe, and you can acknowledge this, Ms. Black, when you come up, I think that you administer for OSLI, the state revolving programs. And have I got that accurate?
Yes, sir. My name is Beth Blackwell. I'm the Grants and Loans Manager for the Office of State Lands and Investment. Our office is the administrative arm of the SRF programs, both drinking water and clean water. We apply for the grants, we accept the applications. We then work with DEQ and Water Development Office on the technical side of the projects. We are the bankers. We complete board matters to be presented to SLIB. We then prepare all the loan documents and follow the loan through disbursements. All of our programs offered through the office are reimbursement. So we must review your receipts, make sure all of your expenditures are in line with the project that we approved and are eligible under the program that you are asking reimbursement from. We then process all payments on those loans as well. We essentially track them from cradle to grave.
So, and I appreciate that, and that's why I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. And so as you look through the bill and kind of see this, have we forgotten anything?
No, sir, I think the working relationship between the three agencies is good. It's just going to be a different approach to things. So it's going to readjusting the will, maybe not recreating the will, but adjusting the will as in just a different process.
So do you see state land still doing a similar process as you traditionally do with the SRF in this bill?
Honestly, I think that's to be determined, but I think our interaction and our part in it may be less given the fact that these will be presented to the Select Water Committee. So we wouldn't be preparing those documents for them. It's just a different process, not knowing how their office prepares for their board meetings. So.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
follow up on that. And maybe this is a collaborative answer between yourself and Brandon. Would it be better if we adjusted the bill to follow the process that SRF currently uses so that it came through your office first with accompanying help from DEQ and Water Development versus Water Development being the lead? You said this tweaks the process a little bit, the way this bill works. Would there be efficiencies to be gained to track the existing process is really the question. And right, like I said, it might be a tag team answer here and not trying to take authority away from Brandon's group and looking for the most expeditious way to make this function so that everybody gets a win.
I can start and you can finish. I would say through our office, we have established processes. Our programs generally all work the same. We have established application due dates. They're generally a certain number of days before a given SLIB meeting. Then once we receive applications, we review them. But our process is pretty standard and it's pretty efficient. I think it may be a learning process for Water Development's office just because they're going to be dealing with different types of projects. It's not that they're not able to do it.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe that our thought and some of the communication that we had among the three agencies before is we envision this as mimicking, like I said, the same process. So we're gonna, if it's through Water Development's probably going to steal the same processes that the state revolving fund already uses. So that collaboration, I think, is where that would occur, that we would steal a lot of the same processes they use and kind of make them fit this program.
So I'm curious, the couple of different things. First of all, it looks to me like the way that this is crafted, it exempts the commission from the Administrative Procedure Act and the Rulemaking Act, but it doesn't exempt the office. So unless we delineate certain, that the office is exempt, I think by definition, you are not exempt the way this is currently crafted. Meaning that in order for you to establish criteria and make recommendations, you're going to have rulemaking processes and comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. And basically, that would mean it would be subject to judicial review, that it would be, and all those other components to it. So that's the way I read this. I mean, so have you had that discussion with LSO or with any other, with legal assistance from your office on what obligation this puts on the office versus the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I think it was our assumption all along that we would at least need to go through the emergency rule process and to get that off the ground and then follow the formal rule process. It's very similar to what we did with the emergency water program last year, the year before. We established the rules through the emergency rules procedure and then followed it up with permanent rules following that. So I think there's a potential that just emergency rules, given the short time frame of this, could work. But that was our original thought, is emergency rules followed by permanent rules to develop.
And then in terms of putting those rules together and having staffing who are going to monitor every one of these loans and review the expenses and how it's expended, do you have the staffing to do that? Or do you need some of this money to help staff up, to have additional staff to operate this?
Mr. Chairman, when we evaluated this, we did not ask for additional staff. We felt that it would be very similar to the program that we already run. I will say that we don't know everything at this point either, but our intention was that we would do it with the existing staff.
Okay, thank you. For the
Mr.
questions.
Chairman, can I throw? Well, typically, when they go out for proposals to receive brand new applications to the Water Development Commission, it's not unusual to have 20 and 30 applications at one time. Their staff handles those types of volumes. The last 2 years, the numbers have been way down because people have perceived that because of the budget crisis last year, they assumed there was no money and so no one was applying. This last year, we went out for 7 projects. And that's all was the application. So I think there's a little window where their workload is lighter that they can handle it.
And I noticed that, the language says that you will provide the grants up to 85%, meaning you can do 50%, you can do 40%, you can do 65%. And how then does the office envision making that determination, saying, well, we'll fund you, but we're going to fund you at 50% or 55% because you have a bigger pocketbook, you can afford it, or because we want to spread the money further and we want to require matching obligations, get the biggest bang for the buck. You have all those options in front of you, the way this is currently crafted. So my question is, have you thought about that and how you would handle that as an agency?
Mr. Chairman, from what I remember, the discussion was that if they were able to obtain other funding and would only need, say, 40% of this, that's where that would come into play. But
So one of the criteria, as you envision it, for approval of a project is getting the biggest bang for the buck. If they have more money, they can bring into the game, so we get more projects done. That spreads the money further.
that's correct.
Is that right? Okay. Is that accurate?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further questions? Any other public comment? Okay, Don, we'll close public comment. Is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Larson. Further more discussion. So, you want to move the amendment? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. But I wanted to ask Don a couple of questions, because Don, and I think that we're going to do a couple amendments to this, and so we're going to need a scrivener. So that's kind of why I called you up. Just so, I don't know if you were listening in on any of it, but so by changing this from 602, 604 to 602, I mean, that's what one of the first amendments is. 602 is all ARPA direct. Is that correct? But it's not via application.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the 604 was a error in the drafting of this. It should have said 602 all along. 602 is not a application process. The state has its money in hand, but this is also not intended to be revenue replacement funds, which means it does have to qualify for the permissible uses.
And just roughly, what are those?
Well, the permissible uses in this case are the equivalent of the safe drinking water and safe clean water. So I think the projects that you're contemplating here meet those criteria.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Representative Walters, you have an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several amendments, but I'll start with the one that was handed out. And so, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to use the entire amendment. The changing of 604 to 602, I would move that change.
Hey, Representative Schwartz, would you hand this to Don, your copy? So he's got something to look at.
If we move down, Mr. Chairman, on the amendment to the line 3 of the amendment, it says we would insert periodically. In my motion, I do not want to insert periodically. So that would not be part of this motion. And then on line 16 of the amendment itself, the after commission first come, first serve language would be eliminated from this amendment. If I get a second, I'll explain why. So we would only need, if you read the sentence there on page 3, line 18, the only reason for that to add periodically is if you had the first come, first served basis. But if we're not reviewing them first come, first served basis, then periodically doesn't need to be included because it would be based upon a deadline. After such deadline, the projects would be reviewed. So hopefully that motion makes sense.
Okay, does everyone understand the amendment? Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Just for clarification, so you're deleting the periodically, but you are continuing to remove the honor roll.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I should have been listening more carefully, but is the portion about the first come, first serve at the end of that draft amendment also deleted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, does everyone understand the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Any other amendments? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Start with a simple one on page 7. After, at the end of line 7 on page 7, that I would add the language submitted directly to JAC. If I get a second, I'll explain. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. We, the legislature, receive reports throughout the year on a regular basis. I think it's important that JAC have this one highlighted to us, as we will be needing to track the expenditures of these ARPA dollars. And so that it doesn't get just passed over as another legislative report that comes in. I think a direct submittal to us is important.
And I presume it'll also be, it talks about it earlier on, that the select water has to have the opportunity to review and recommend contracts, but it doesn't say you got to report after you've done it. So do you want to have it report to both entities? Okay, all right. Okay. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving back to page 5. In subsection 4, which starts on line 5 of page 5, it discusses the Water Development Commission not entering into any, that whole paragraph I'm going to summarize. It says the Water Development Commission won't enter into any contract until they have received a review and recommendation from the Select Water Committee. And the legislature never delegates our authority to just one committee for a recommendation. And so I would make a change here that says line 5 would stay the same. Line 6, after the word shall in line 6, report to the Select Water Committee, period, and delete the rest of the paragraph. So it would really be a 2-line or 2.5-line statement. The Water Development Commission and the Water Development Office shall report to the Select Water Committee.
Report what?
These projects. And maybe, and we can fine tune that, but whatever the projects that have been approved.
Okay, conceptual agreement. Don, you understand the motion? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start a really large one here, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we convert this from the Water Development Office doing this to OSLI doing this in consultation with Water Development. So there's several places, and I'd work with staff to make that happen. But I think we heard, for me, compelling enough testimony that OSLI is already structured to accept and work on these sorts of projects. And they already work with Water Development for the technical and DEQ for the technical support. And just from a timeliness and effectiveness and really capacity to accomplish the projects, it makes sense that we make that change, that OSLI really be the lead and Water Development be the support in this process.
So is there a second? So my question is, OSLI may have a process set up, but they definitely, I mean, how often does OSLI meet? And to direct them to do something, they then have to report to SLIB and have a, that's kind of who their fiduciary is. And so we're going to add another layer of bureaucracy on this thing by doing that. And how fast can they get it done? And what kind of oversight would SLIB have on that process? So
Mr. Chairman, to respond to that, I don't think we added a layer of bureaucracy because we already have the Water Development Office reporting to the commission for final approval. And this would just basically make it to where SLIB was the final approval. So it's really no change in the amount of steps that would be evaluated. It's just a matter of who is the lead and how we go through those steps.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you to resist this amendment, and here's a couple of reasons why. We discussed this at length with the Select Water of who to make the lead agency. There was some specific comments and feelings amongst Select Water that they wanted the Water Development Commission to be the lead, even though it was a little bit unusual. And one of the biggest issues was during construction, the Water Development Commission has their staff engineers already out in the communities circulating, managing projects. And OSLI simply doesn't have the staff engineers on the construction site. So that was a big deal to us.
Similar.
This discussion, because I get that component of it. The technical side is built into the Water Development Commission. It's the administrative side for handling the process and the reimbursement and the payment and tracking it that I see the strength being at OSLI. And I'm not sure how I structure who directs that, but I just see two different strengths here, and somehow how do we capitalize on those? Is where I'm at.
Mr. Chairman, we concur the strengths of the two agencies. It appeared to us that it was going to be impossible to have LSOI administer all the paperwork, get the contracts, doing pay requests, and then, and have the Water Development Commission staff literally out on the job site. It just choked us down. And then we also were concerned, we didn't want this to go back to the SLIB board. We wanted it to stay with the Select Water Committee / the Water Development Commission. So that was a big issue too.
So the question then is, are you comfortable that the Select Water Office has the staff to manage all of the administrative responsibilities of kicking out, in a course of a year and a half, $95 million worth of loans and following up on it? As if you were OSLI doing the same thing. That's the question.
Mr. Chairman, I'm interested to hear the director's response, but as we debated this at length and we finally chose the Water Development Commission, we asked the three agencies how they would feel about that and then would they support this approach? And they all very cooperative in saying we can support and buoy up the state Water Development Commission.
Any comments? I mean, tell us why you think you can do it and how you're planning to do it. And what your qualifications are for managing.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Simpson discussed this a little bit earlier. We have a 25-person staff. Not all of us are engineers, but most of us are technical of some nature, planning division and a construction division. So we are used to basically seeing projects from all the way from an applicant saying we have an issue with something through going through the analysis of what's the best alternative to get it done to overseeing the construction and the contracting and all that stuff. We do see a number of projects every year. Most of us are project managers and have that capability to manage those types of projects from beginning to end. And we've made a commitment to the Select Water Committee that whatever they put in front of us, we'll get it done. So.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, you see a number of projects a year. Are you ready to see a quadrupling of that number of projects with the existing staff and still feel like you can cover the workload? That's really the question here of capacity. And then you'll be expected in all of that workload to track all of the receipts and expenditures because they all have to meet the federal guidelines that are set forth here, not just the existing state guidelines.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be honest, we've had this discussion, this very discussion, who would be best. And I think it's spot on that we each have our strengths. And I can't speak for state lands, but our hope was that they would very much assist us in the banking of this. And I don't know if it would require additional staff for them to take it on or not. I won't speak for them. But that was really our idea, was to rely heavily on them and their process, whether our folks are doing that or not, from the banking side. Water development, I don't know what our current contracts are, but we have a very large, and I don't remember, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars that we currently have on the books currently. So it will increase our workload. But I think we felt, and we testified to Select Water, that we felt like we could handle it. But that was in the back of my mind at that time, that Office of State Lands would be involved heavily helping us behind the scenes.
So, and I hope everybody understands, we're not trying to make anybody feel that we just want to make sure that we get it right. In what we don't see in the bill is a delineation of responsibilities between the agencies. And so in my understanding of what OSLI does is they don't do any technical stuff. That's not their job. They don't want to do that. Currently what they do is once on approval, they then track and take care of the reimbursement of the work that's been done with the funds that are available. And so that's kind of where I'm getting I'm just not understanding the delineation and so when you say we're going to rely heavily on them, I don't know what that means. I'm hoping that that means that you guys are doing the technical stuff, you're evaluating the projects, you're making the determination who's going to get awarded the projects and then oversight of the project, then who's doing the backup, you know? And is that state land? And somehow I would like to see that structured just a little bit. And if the, because as I read the bill, that's going to fall on you. And I keep hearing you say, yeah, we can do that. And I'm not trying to, okay, we're going to take you to work. But then I hear you, but we're going to rely on state lands, but I don't know what you're going to rely on state lands to do. Am I making any sense?
You are, Mr. Chairman, and I'm probably the one that's not making sense because I don't want to speak for OSLI. But we would happily have a joint involvement in this with OSLI with whatever they're willing to provide. And the more they can provide, the better this is going to be, in my opinion.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
a follow up on that. I think that's really where the crux of it starts to fall apart. And that is, if your agency is the lead agency, your final determination is going to come from the Water Development Commission. If OSLI is the lead agency, their final determination is going to come from the SLIB board, because each of you report to a separate entity for your final determination. You are the staff to those final folks. And so that's really, if we structure it to where we go with OSLI leading the conversation and you providing, your department providing the technical support to OSLI, OSLI has to get their authority to proceed from SLIB. Whereas if we go with your agency leading the charge and OSLI being the backup, then the Water Development Commission is who will have the final say in the project. They're the final decision makers. The commission is obviously. And so I think there becomes a rub if OSLI does all of the banking paperwork and the commission makes the final determination, and then there becomes a question on the billing practices or something to that nature. They don't have any authority to question the commission, the Water Development Commission's decision, yet they're the ones that had to do the back of the house banking. And the inverse is true if it goes the other direction. However, there may be a little less onus on the commission itself if all that was provided was technical support rather than the financial hammer, you might say. That, I think, is where the real determination here. It's not who should have the special authority to say what the final project is. It's how do we carry this out functionally to where we don't end up in a position that funds have been expended improperly by no fault, but by accident, because, and then the follow through cannot be enforced because one entity is determining that it happened improperly and the other entity made the final determination. So that's where I think we have a bit of a disconnect, or where we can down the line start to have this erode and fall apart. And so I think that's where what the overall questions we're trying to ask is to figure out the best path forward so that we don't have that problem in a year and a half or 2 years from now when we're awarding projects and funds are going out the door and now we're starting to evaluate other issues. So please help us determine what the best course of action is here.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we would be committed to making this bill work however it is. And I don't know if Director Scoggins wants to come testify to this or not, but sorry. So this goes back to a bill that we worked with, or a concept that we worked with the governor's office. And BQ, OSLI, and Water Development were all involved in that. And when we left that, I think that we had the same conversation. And remind me, Director, what was, when we were working with the governor's office, what was the end result that we kind of concluded on?
Mr. Chairman. So, we had a lot of discussions about how this would work, and you're right. the three agencies, TEQ and Water Development and OSLI, we all have a lot of different strengths. And when we had those discussions, we sort of, I think everybody thought, well, OSLI should just take care of the banking in the back room and do an MOU or something. And, or, you know, with maybe oversight from Water Development or something. We didn't really land in a specific place, but it was my understanding that at some point a decision was made that the Water Development Commission might be in the best place to evaluate the projects themselves. And perhaps there was a way for the agencies to kind of work together to make sure administratively the funds got dispersed properly and the proper eligibility determinations were made and that sort of thing, working together as a team. I mean, that's sort of how SRF works right now, only it's the SLIB that's making the decisions. So this is a little bit of a, I don't know, variation on a theme, I guess. But that's how it was presented to us. And of course, we offered, hey, we have the processes in place. We have the systems in place. We have the staff that do these sorts of things. With CARES Act, we processed over 600 applications. I think we awarded 122 grants, doled out 222 million. And we did it relatively quickly. And that was a reimbursement program too. So we were bringing our expertise for getting the money out and for tracking it on the back end through the grants and also because it was a reimbursement program, as Ms. Blackwell said, we were looking at the receipts and we were verifying that whatever it was the SLIB approved, that that's in fact what we were reimbursing. Also, in that process, we had Attorney General oversight. That was part of the legislation, which further helped sort of ensure that we all believed that the funds were being spent appropriately and within the confines of the CARES Act program. So that was the oversight for that. But with respect to this, I think it was, the discussion was that the Water Development Commission might be in a better place to help figure out which projects should be funded with the other agencies working to help get the money out and bring their expertise to the table.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So my head's spinning a little bit at this point, and partly because of the relationship between these two bodies or entities. But we already allocated 50 million, is my understanding. And that was through OSLI. And I'm getting head nodding. So part of my concern is, are we going to have two separate pieces of funding? Good, but then I'll stop there because I'm seeing head shaking no.
If this one passes, the others no.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
We reviewed this extensively with the Select Water Committee. We discussed all these ideas. The Select Water Committee selected the Water Development Commission because they did not necessarily want SLIB to be making the final decisions. And we recognized the strengths of the technical staff of the Water Development Commission. These projects could be very large projects and they require inspectors to be out on the job, monitoring what's going on during a construction process and understanding that process. So I recommend we defeat the amendment and leave the process as it's written in the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I think the good speaker just solidified the reason for the change. That water development is the technical end, and making this change leaves them the technical end and lets the administrative side really flow more through OSLI. It still allows water development to be the guys out on the ground doing the inspections, doing everything the good representative just mentioned, but it doesn't bog them down in the office doing all of the administrative needs that this project and these dollars are going to require.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Director Gephardt, would you agree with that statement?
Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree at all. We didn't have a strong, the three agencies did not have a strong preference as to how the administration or how this bill was structured. We left it to the Select Water to decide that. We did not have a strong preference, and I would say we still don't have a strong preference. But it goes back to, I think we rely heavily on OSLI on the administrative side, if they were willing to do it.
So I would phrase the question differently. It sounds to me like you, as three different government agencies, are going to figure out and get this done one way or the other.
That's correct.
So I don't know how good it is if we sit here and nitpick on it all night. Besides, I'm hungry. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I will say we committed to that, and I won't speak for them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we committed to that. We want to be as helpful as possible and bring the experience and expertise that we have to the table to get these funds out.
And Mr. Chairman, and so Director Scoggin, if we keep our sticky fingers off from it and just leave it the way it's structured, you're okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think we can all work together. We've committed to doing that, and our agencies do that now with the SRF programs and successfully.
Okay, back on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
That motion failed. So I got amendment on page 4. Page 4, line 10. I think we should change may to shall. So that there is a criteria.
Page 4, what?
Page 4, line 10. This says they can establish criteria, but I think they have to.
Second.
establish criteria. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Any other amendments? Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, on page 5, I propose to delete lines 13 through 21.
Can't hear you, Clark, please.
The motion is on page 5, lines 13 to 21 to delete those lines,
Discussion?
if I may. We want to get these funds out quickly, but we've got more than 2 years for the award and almost 4 and more than 4 to get the projects done. So I think just having normal oversight rules works fine.
So the question is, do we want to, if this gets tied up in a lawsuit, then nothing's going to happen. So I'm opposed to the motion. I mean, they've told us they'll do emergency rules, they'll proceed with it, but at some point in time, we just got to let them go. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The motion failed. Any other motions? Don?
Mr. Chairman, in your printed version on page 1, line 14, I believe there needs to be a conforming amendment and strike capital projects fund and insert state fiscal recovery fund.
I didn't hear it all.
So moved.
Okay,
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. You changed on line 15 from 604 to 602.
correct.
For whatever reason, the printed copy before you, which was not my product, on page 1, line 14, strike after coronavirus, strike capital projects fund and insert state fiscal recovery fund. That's the title of 602.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. So I have a question. I mean, why wouldn't we include 602 and 604? And so that they could use funds from both locations. It just means they'd have to go to the governor's office through an application process. But that may be a better use of the funds that the governor may not. That'll be kind of his decision, but why would we limit it?
Mr. Chairman, the criteria for 604 is almost exclusively broadband and multi-purpose vertical capital construction.
Okay. That way you were one good reason. Okay, further discussions. All right, what I'd like to do is, any other motions? So Donna, what we'd like is to have a version of this that, because we're going to meet tomorrow at lunch, that we can just walk through the changes and so we can see them and make sure that we have one more set of eyes, look at it one more time. Is that doable? Do you need no dose or anything like that for tonight? Okay. Okay, as amended, all those in favor say aye.
We want to do that tomorrow.
Well, yeah, we can. We can, yeah, okay. Okay.
So what is it you would like to do? Is this a carryover and then we'll vote? You want to vote
Yes.
Yeah,
tonight?
yeah, we'll carry it over.
Carryover.
Right.
Carry over tomorrow at noon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, next
Thank
is
Thanks, Chip.
79.
Thanks. Thanks, Director, and Beth.
I guess we should have done the other one first. Huh? So someone needs to take some good notes as we present this so that we can actually describe what we do when this thing hits the floor.
Does your summary cover what this does?
And we're gonna need the background numbers. I think Don was talking about. I mean, we were just way off on the numbers on how much this carryover is. It's actually a lot of money. It's been up to 2 or 3 million on occasion, right? That's my understanding. So anyway, go ahead, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Robin Cooley, I'm the Director of Wyoming Workforce Services. I have with me my CFO, Robin Martin, and my Administrator of Workforce Programs, Holly McCamey Simone. I'm just going to give you just a general big picture of why this was proposed. I would ask Ms. Martin to then talk to you about the numbers, and then Ms. McCamey Simone to talk to you about how we spend these funds, if you've got questions around
Okay.
that. It works.
Please proceed.
So this is an act to amend 27.3 Wyoming statute 27.3.211, which establishes our employment support fund monies. What it does is with those support fund monies, it will, instead of reverting those funds to the Wyoming Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, it will just allow those funds to not revert so that we can continue using those. And this goes to the reason for our request here. As you know, our unemployment insurance trust fund is very healthy. It's been in the top 3 in the nation pretty consistently for quite a while. We're very proud of that, and certainly we've needed those funds these past couple of years. But
Top
with,
what?
excuse me,
Mr. Chairman, the top what in the nation? Top 3? Top.
it at various times within the top 3 across the country, depending on which report you look at. But with that healthy trust fund, what we're finding is with these employment support funds, we're needing these funds to use for services for reemployment purposes across the state, whether that's to help us with administration internally in the office or to provide actual services to our citizens around this state. So instead of these funds reverting to that very healthy trust fund, it just made more sense to us to be allowed to use these funds for services for individuals in our community, for our citizens. So that was the reason really for the request today. And with that, I would.
Go ahead.
Director Cooley, do the support funds, are they generated through funds from the unemployment insurance? Is that they're not a general fund?
That's Mr. Chairman, that Representative Larson, that's correct.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to turn it over to CFO Martin to talk to you about that very issue and some of the funding issues.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions that you do have. You did mention the past, excuse me. So the sweeping information that I do have for you today is that it was actually done on a biennial basis. In BFY 13, I'm going to round up. We swept $2.4 million into the state trust fund. In BFY 15, we swept 1.6 million. In BFY 17, we swept 1.4. BFY 9.
Could I get those numbers again in the year, starting with the
Yes.
2.4 million?
Yes.
What year?
Of course, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. So BFY 13, $2.4 million. BFY 15, 1.6. BFY 17, 1.4. And again, these are rounded estimates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters. I was going to address that. So BFY 19, we did request an extension through the budget office and SAO. So we are running BFY currently. It's extended through this biennium as well, and those run alongside the grants that were also set up in that current BFY. It just made sense and was more transparent to run those concurrent with the grants that they're supporting. So we're running BFY 19 and BFY 21 funds at the same time.
Go ahead, please.
So to put the swept amount in perspective, what was the spent amount?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I can get those numbers for you back historically into the BFY 13, 15, and 17. What I have with me today are more relevant and current numbers.
So the Employment Support Fund is funded. What is its average funding per biennium? Total dollars, it's around 18 million, 19 million?
Mr. Chairman, so in, let's see, I've got my note here. In BFY 19 and 21, so to understand these funds appropriately, know that Unit 0150 is our employment and training, and then Unit 0301 is our unemployment insurance. So these employment support funds support both of those programs. So to address that, in BFY 19 and 21, the appropriation for the E&T or employment and training side of the house was $1.9 million. And in BFY 19 and BFY 21, the UI appropriation, so Unit 0301 is 5.4.
So I asked a question earlier and I just think I confused myself with your last comment. So these funds, the 1.9 and the 5 point something, you say are funded to 0301, which is your unemployment insurance.
So Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, so we have two units that are funded in part by these employment support funds. They are running kind of behind the scenes to catch any overflow federal dollars because a lot of these grants are minimally funded for the state of Wyoming.
Well, but what I'm trying to figure out is where these funds originate from. If we're funding unemployment insurance, I thought that's where we were getting the funds from to begin with.
Correct, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. So there is an appropriation established in both units. So in 0150 and also 0301.
And that's the 1.9 and the 5.4.
Correct.
So combined biennium, it's roughly a $7.5 million.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
And so what I'm curious about is, so you kind of use a fund that's kind of like a slush fund to help cover different expenses, obligations that come up. And so that's what I'm curious about, because I'm looking at it, because you had no reversions in 1920 and 21-22. So you use the funds up.
With the extension.
That is correct.
Yeah, because they're carryover. So the problem that I have is that this doesn't quite explain that. And so that's what we need to understand from the floor, is to describe where the money comes from, what it's used for, and how you've used it in the past, and wherever you sprinkled it around, so we can articulate in a transparent way exactly what's going on. And that's the bug.
That's the homework.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we're happy to go back and add to this document some of those numbers, but as well some of the information that Ms. McCamey-Simone has about how we do spend that. It's pretty valuable funding for some of these programs.
Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to give you some kind of an overview of that. we use that small percentage of the UI tax revenue to support key workforce development initiatives. And it's critical because we are a minimally funded state, as Robin mentioned. And if, just to give you an example, if we compare that to North Dakota, they get a similarly federally funded grant, and they only operate, I believe, 9 workforce centers in that state. We operate 20 workforce centers to capture everyone in the state and make sure that we're serving those citizens well.
But part of the problem of this explanation is you're using kind of this pour over fund to fund ongoing programs that theoretically you would think would be in your budget, that we would see and that we would fund as part of a unit or a program. So that's what doesn't make sense to me.
And
Can I tag on that? So I think what I heard, Director, from you previously is we have we've got these monies committed. For example, in Wyoming, we use them to help fund 20 workforce service centers to supplement some federal funds to fund these workforce centers. Then at the end of the year or the end, we have to revert when we still have them, the need for them. We have them committed, and then we have to bring them right back to fund them. And where if we didn't revert them, it just saves you guys from doing this goofy dance, I guess, that we do to make sure, because you've got them committed to keep the workforce centers and these types of things going. And then, but if they aren't actually consumed or expended, whatever the word is, you're required to revert them. Do I have that right?
that's correct. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is correct. And
So
just to
if
give,
I'm just trying to get to the end result. I mean, we want to do this, but we want to do it in such a way that we know how much money is spent where when you come in and you present your budget to us, and that you just don't grab it out of this fund and then fund this down here, because that looks like it's a kind of an egg game, and you're doing it to get around us versus you're doing it because you've got a directive from whomever. Am I making sense?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That makes perfect sense. And you use the term slush fund, and of course, we don't like to use that term, but what we would commit to this group is to provide you with an annual report on how we do spend those funds. So it is transparent. So it's very clear to you where those funds have gone. So there's no.
Well, what's interesting is if it's hard for the way that you describe it, it's hard to understand how the fund would continue to build up. I mean, just theoretically, you put it in your budget, you have an obligation to fund these 20 locales, but then so why would you have excess dollars to begin with? Or, they've created this the unemployment support fund, but it's kind of like you just grab from it when you need it, and that's really not the way it theoretically ought to work. And that's what we fight against from other agencies. We want to know where you're spending the money, how much you need to operate it, and then we want to pay for it. And if we don't like the program, then we don't fund it. So that's to me, that's the cut and dried of it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I completely agree with you. I think I can't address how the reports or things were managed in the past. Our goal is to be able to manage these on a more timely basis, looking at them quarterly, looking at what's coming in and ensuring that we have the collections that we need to match the appropriation that we do have to make sure that it's not under or over. Our ask is that if by chance it is over, that we're able to hold on to those funds to address the shortages later. There are a lot of factors that do go into whether these collections are very high or very low. And with the non-charge, we're expecting actually the swing on the low end potentially in the future. So what hanging on to those funds biennium to biennium will allow us to do is to project better rather than on a fiscal year, of course. But even biennially, starting fresh into a new biennium and being able to just capture those funds and make sure that we can collect what our appropriation is. Because we are expecting them actually to drop a little bit low because of the non-charge. But if they are higher, we're just hoping to hang on to those so that we can continue that reconciliation process on a quarterly basis rather than fiscally or even biennially.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think it's important, an important point that Robin just mentioned is the less we collect in UI taxes, the less goes into that employment support fund. And then so during the pandemic, when those employers were paying those higher rates, then more came into that employment support fund. So that does ebb and flow, and then our needs ebb and flow as well. So throughout the pandemic, we were the only workforce centers in the nation to remain open, and we needed those extra funds to help support that and serve those citizens that were coming in asking for help with UI.
Okay, further questions? Other questions? Does everyone understand it?
Well, I think I think so.
Go ahead.
You're right, because thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't really understand it. So to start with, what's the formula that determines out of the UI taxes, how much goes to the employment support fund?
So there is a computed factor, and it's kind of an algorithm and a computation, but basically we look at, to do the UI tax rate, we look at the base rate plus the 3 factors. And when we get that computed factor, 60% of that goes over to the non-charge, ineffectively charged, and then 40% goes into that employment support factor. So it depends on how much we bring in, how much that 40% will be in that employment. Yeah.
Mr.
But,
Chairman.
but there's no specific designation for the use of those funds. You got, and once you have the funds built up, you kind of use them where you want. Is that fair?
They must be used towards workforce initiatives, yes.
Which just means anything that you want to use it for. That's a workforce initiative.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that. And I would offer that we will be happy to provide you a report. Another thing that to mention, to give you another example, is this past couple of years, we've been required to get extended help in temporary assistance throughout our agency. And these funds were critical in getting us that assistance. So it's going to ebb and flow. It's going to change. It's going to be different every year, I would suspect. But what I would also, as it relates to how these funds are determined, we've got a flow chart here that we'll get to you as well. That really, for me, it being a visual person, it helps you recognize where the money from the UI goes and where it goes from to the employee support funds, but also then into that 528 training fund dollars. So it kind of, it maps it out for you, and I'd be happy to get that to you.
Mr. Chairman.
So, Director Cooley, so I went back and looking at your budget in 0301, and it kind of gives a definition of how the support funds can be used, and it kind of gives you 4 there on page 92, kind of gives you 4 areas. The fourth one, support employment office programs administered. I mean, you can handle deficit, you can use it for deficits, administer and the revenues collected, further support programs and strengthen unemployment fund solvency. But then the last one, support employment office programs administered. Can you give us a couple examples of that we can use as we identify, because I can see where those would fluctuate year to year, depending on what they are.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I wanted to make sure I understand your question. Are you looking for examples that we have used those funds for?
Examples of those programs, what kind of programs?
So I'll give you an example of right now what we would be using it on. throughout the pandemic, we saw a lot of dislocated workers come in our office. And our funds that we have are about to be expended in that area. So we would need to utilize those employment support funds to help with that, get them basic career services training and get them back into the workforce. We also use it at times for our temporary staff and that administration of those funds in our workforce centers. On the UI side, we have used it in the past for upgrading our YUI system in small areas and also fixing any defects that we have in that system. We had a lot of CARES Act funds that helped us program that, but any defects, we needed to use those employment support funds for as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative.
if the problem that we want to solve is that you have trouble on the odd numbered fiscal year ends, could you solve that problem and achieve the same result by in the statute 27-3-211, have the sentence read, the monies in the employment support fund shall not revert to the general fund at the end of any fiscal year, except that any unappropriated amounts remaining in the fund at the end of any even numbered fiscal year shall be transferred by the state treasurer to the state unemployment insurance trust fund. I mean, that would solve your odd numbered year problem, wouldn't it? In other words, you would insert the phrase even numbered in front of the phrase fiscal year
This means
in
you
the
gotta
existing
spend all the
statute.
money.
Well, but it doesn't, so you want to start diverting to the general fund?
No, to back into the.
Anything, it would just solve their, it seems like they've got an odd numbered year problem. And if you could solve that odd numbered year problem by inserting the phrase even numbered in front of the phrase fiscal year on the last line of 27-3-211A, and that would at least solve that problem. Because if we adopt this bill as drafted, then it never reverts anywhere and it just grows and grows and grows if they want it to, right? They could just let it grow for, if you wanted to, you could just let it sit there and grow to $10 million if you felt like, right? Whereas the current statutory scheme provides that it reverts to the unemployment insurance trust fund, essentially, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve, right? If the problem is the odd numbered fiscal year problem, then solve it by inserting the.
Well, there's two problems. One is that they don't expend all the money and it's supposed to revert. But the other problem is they want to be able to use it. And if you do it, if you revert at the end of biennium, you're still not. And if you're putting it into the unemployment trust fund, that's not, according to you, the best use of the funds.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I think the problem that's being solved and the issue is to just allow this fund to continue rolling from biennium to biennium. And it doesn't matter if it's odd number year, it works out to be the odd number year is the issue because that's the end of the biennium. And so to have cash flow basically occurring on a regular basis, that fund just has to be able to continue rolling. Otherwise, at the end of one biennium, it all rolls into the trust fund. And so maybe they haven't spent all of it right then, but they need that money available on July 1 of the new biennium for the work that they would be doing starting that biennium. And they would use those funds through till the end, but they just carry an ongoing balance so that they can continue the work on an ongoing basis. And the real issue is when they have to sweep it, then they have no money to start the new year until funds begin to come in. And so potentially they would go 6 months with nothing in the account.
And if that's the case, why don't we just leave a minimum balance of funds?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's what this does, is leave that minimum balance.
Well, it doesn't have to be, you could just say only up to 1 million, but everything else sweeps. If you don't want to just grow the fund indefinitely.
So an alternative, if we require an annual report that includes what the expenditures were and what the fund balance is, we'll see if it's getting skewed. And at that point, then we can make adjustments. But I'm a little uncomfortable getting into tweaking the bill. So when we get to that point, I'm going to make that amendment.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to get another update from you, right? so we can actually explain this. Yeah, and I think Representative Larson is going to get to do it this time.
I pawned it off on Tom.
So let's going to the bill. Anything on the bill itself? Any other comments?
No, Mr. Chairman, when would it be best for you to have this updated document?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning?
We'll probably not have this come up tomorrow because I think Friday's the last day, right? So if we have it by Friday, that just gives you the data to work on it tomorrow. And
Thank you.
we'll kick this out on Friday then. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any public comment? Any public comment? Corin, come on, speak up. Okay, okay. Close public comment. Move the bill by Representative Larson, second by Representative. All those in favor say aye. Okay. Go ahead.
I would just, I think it's adding a section B. on page
Reporting,
6.
yeah.
It requires an annual report providing us information on both expenditures and fund balance.
Well, it would make sense. The report would go to both the labor and to us.
That would be fine. That's friendly.
Yeah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Hang on. Go
Are you
back
awake
to.
over there?
Yes. Okay, go, Mr. Schwartz, please tell me. Chapter and verse, please.
On page 2, after line 3, there would be a section B that would require an annual report to JC and the Labor Health Committee delineating an itemization of expenditures and the fund balance.
Okay. Representative Schwartz will sit down and help you write it.
That's what I need.
Yep. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Roll call as amended.
Heck, I'm still working on the amendments. Okay. Roll call on House Bill 79, Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson, Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters, and Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
All ayes do pass as amended.
Corin, you were going to chat with us a little bit. Come on up.
Did you have nothing to do on a Wednesday night?
Oh, this is much more fun. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, we can. There's no reason that we have to have a public meeting continue, so we'll close public meeting. So go ahead.
Go ahead. Would you like me to continue to use the microphone? Yes, please.
We hear better.